as we dive in together here, Marcus, as I've shared with you and we've talked about, the the art or science of balneology in particular is ancient. So could you share with us about where did this come from, the roots from, whether it was Egypt, Rome, and Greece, and how we'll call it the bathing of waters was part of a daily life and regimen for health and well-being?
Yeah, a great intro. I mean, I think let's start with the word balneology because it is a word that isn't kind of in the common speak, right? It comes from the Latin balneo, which if you think if you know any Spanish or baño, the idea of bath, um, so and ology, of course, is the suffix that means the study of. So it's the study of bathing, balneology, and specifically it's used for anything to do with the therapeutic use of natural mineral spring water. So that's drinking water, inhaling mineral steams, using mineral muds, and of course soaking in mineral water. And so that's I love that word because I love unusual words, but also just because it really speaks to kind of the essence of you know how did hydrotherapy and how did our relationship with as humans with water even start in the first place? And I think, Stuart, you've kind of intuited it with this question. It's like our use of water as a therapy is ancient. It's ingrained in our humanity, and I think it was even invoked in our beautiful blessing this morning. Is that water? We are creatures of water, essentially, and so as humans, we've always been drawn to water as a medium by which we can come back to ourselves. And so if we look at some of the most ancient cultures that we are aware of, I mean, it goes back even further. I think the oldest use of water therapeutically would be from the Ayurvedic tradition, which, some sources, I think pretty credibly say is at least 5,000 years old. And there would be water invocations. The water gods would be invoked during a healing ceremony in ancient Ayurvedic tradition. But fast forward, another 2,000 years, and you've got the use of natural spring water showing up in places like ancient Greece, ancient Rome, the Mediterranean basin, where we have a lot of history with our culture. Where wherever we've seen human culture, we can usually trace some sort of bathing tradition to it. And I think to just tie it back to the blessing once more is especially in this continent, and when I say this continent, I actually mean North America, where I spend most of my time. um, the indigenous people have a really beautiful relationship with water source there, in that it's kind of an expression of the mother. It's the mother earth. It's the lifeblood of the earth itself. And if we look throughout history, where there are springs, where the earth has been generous enough to bless us with a natural flowing spring of water, um, we as humans have set up religious and cultural sites around that for practical reasons. Because we have access to water, we need water to live. But I think there's always an understanding of there's a sacredness that comes along with this water, and the concept of healing with water is part of that relationship, part of us being able to kind of it's a gift, and it's something
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be respected. And I think this community really gets that. So if you look to ancient Rome, if you look to ancient Greece, if you look to the ancient Egyptian cultures, I'll start with the Egyptians. The Nile itself, the flooding and retreat of the Nile River every year created this cyclical relationship with how water would kind of affect lives. And you move into kind of Roman culture and ancient Greek culture, and the use of water as these kind of hubs, these more uh, culture kind of community based health hubs. Of course, I'm talking about bathhouses and balneariums, as they were called in Rome. They become really evident, and I think what's beautiful about that is there's also kind of this cyclical nature to how water is used, meaning, the soak, the rest, the hot, the cold. There's all these different ways that we can relate to that. And so anyway, I mean, we can dive into all of that in a much deeper way. But as an overview, I would just say that we see water show up in all these cultures throughout time. It's been with us from the get-go, and pretty much every tradition that I've been exposed to, as far back as you can trace its tradition, there is an understanding and a relationship to the sacredness of water and the understanding that water heals.
Yes. Well, we also have seen it in religious ceremonies, even up to today, where water plays a critical role in the cleansing that is done in religious ceremonies. And then think about the Ganges. And the Ganges is used as a river for cleansing and purification. And actually, the soul, when people pass, they're often brought to the Ganges. Let's talk about the health side. As a doctor, you understand this. And could you talk with us to say, okay, you go into a hot springs and it has whatever amount of minerals that's in it. What actually is happening to our body? How is it healing our body? And then how does it get into the cells?
Yeah, great question. So, um, water as a therapeutic agent is really unique. Really, as a substance, it's really unique. And I'm sure that most of you folks have been exposed to these ideas. But, water, the way water structures itself at the molecular level gives it some unique properties. One of them being its ability to hold thermal energy. Unlike, say, wood, where you start to increase the thermal energy and it starts to combust, water can hold a massive amount from 0 degrees or 0.1 degrees centigrade to 99.9 degrees centigrade. You can just charge water up with thermal energy and it still maintains its state of being, meaning it still is water, even albeit hot, much hotter. Most substances change form with a lot less of that thermal energy. And so because water has that capacity to hold heat, it also has that capacity to transfer heat. And us, of course, being mostly water, as we mentioned, that transference can happen pretty efficiently between the water in our cells and the water in an environment that we happen to be in. And so that's the first kind of therapeutic quality of water, is the thermal quality. There's another beautiful quality of water that is therapeutic, which is the pressure that it creates. When you're immersed in a bath or a pool or the ocean, the pressure that's being pushed onto the body is exerted at an exactly equal vector at all points on the body, meaning there's just this internal push that's coming from all around us. And of course, if you scuba dive or something like that, you understand that the deeper you go, the heavier that push can be. But even just standing up to your hips in water, there's amazing research on, for people with kind of varicose veins and just, edema of the legs, people who, typically would wear compression socks and things like that, that standing up to the hips in a body of water for 1 to 2 hours a day is as effective as wearing compression socks for a 24-hour period. So that pressure has an ability to improve circulation, and there's also that buoyancy effect of being in the water, which turns off the proprioception in the brain and allows our muscles to relax because it's no longer holding us against gravity. That anti-gravity effect. So those are two of the effects. Now, mineral water has a third effect, and this is where kind of the realm of hydrotherapy and the realm of balneology distinguish themselves. The mineral component of water has an added therapeutic benefit, and there are many, and as most springs that you find have different mineral contents. And I think people always kind of ask me, like, well, what does this mineral do? What does that mineral do? And really, you have to look at each spring and each as kind of its own source identity. It's like, you don't say, oh, Dr. Coplin, he's the guy with black hair and a beard and a blood. It's like, no, I'm a whole kind of presence. And I think it's the same with mineral spring. But what we do know from the kind of the science, again, the study of balneology, We know that the minerals will have an added anti-pain effect, an added anti-inflammatory effect, an added effect on the regulation of the nervous system and the hormonal system. And just I'll finish this off by saying there's a concept that we talk a lot about in this world called hormesis. Hormesis is a healthy amount of stress that's put on the body, whereby the body then reacts by increasing its ability to regulate against that stress. So it's a relationship between the environment. It's it's the kind of thing where we'll use heat for an example. A healthy dose of heat, 102 to 105 degrees soaked in a water for 20 minutes, that's going to upregulate all sorts of amazing kind of biochemical and neurochemical pathways in the body. If you were to do that same period of time in 150 degrees water, that stress would overwhelm our body's ability to resist, and it would be a distress, not a hormetic healthy stress. So these are all the kind of concepts that we look at when we think about how do we plug water, mineral water or otherwise, into a kind of therapeutic regimen for people.
I never knew that about the pressure of the
Yeah.
water in being in the waters, which I'm in the ocean almost every single day. And I do spend first 10 minutes, I just go into the water and just to my hips level. And I just feel, yeah, refreshed and renewed. I feel like I'm like a straw in the water, and I'm just like sucking up all of that energy and all of those minerals that are there. So coming to the mineral side, we've all been told to drink spring water because of either the purity or the minerals. And is there a difference between drinking and bathing in the waters and the uptake of minerals into the body through the pores versus just through drinking it?
Yeah, such a good question. So yes, I think that drinking mineral water, I think we can think of that more as a nutritional intervention. It's you're actually bringing the minerals through the digestive system, and your body's kind of receiving them as such and kind of distributing them as such. So it'd be no different than, I mean, for all intents and purposes, no different than getting those minerals from food or from a supplement, something like this. And that's classically how, like, place like Karlovy Vary, the Carlsbad in Czech Republic, very famous for its drinking water cure. It's actually adorable. They have these like little ceramic sippy cups that you get when you go there. You meet with one of the spa physicians in the town. They write you a little prescription, which is basically how to walk around the town at the given time of day and which springs to drink at which time of the day. And you fill your little sippy cup and you drink it, right? So
Wow.
that is more of a nutritional mineral intervention. Um, and you can get kind of creative with how you prescribe that, because again, that has more of that direct, like, I can prescribe a water that has a higher magnesium content for someone who's doing like athletic recovery, versus something that has more of like a calcium and iron content for someone that I'm working with convalescence, if they're kind of getting over an illness or something like that. This is where you get into the therapy of it. When you soak in mineral water, you do absorb minerals through your skin. We know this to be true. The exact mechanism is still being, fine-tuned. Um, and but what's interesting is that you don't your body seems to have a bit of a self-regulation with the minerals when you soak in them, meaning you can't really overdo it. The body kind of just takes what it needs from that environment and releases a lot of the minerals that it's not going to use. And in fact, the minerals tend to have more of a chemical or a mechanical effect on the body. For instance, like sulfur. Sulfur creates a mild irritant in the skin, which opens up the capillary beds. So you get this like enhanced, draw of blood up to the surface, which has all sorts of thermoregulatory actions and cardiovascular activity, et cetera. We can talk about that, but it's not so much that you've taken the sulfur into your system and it's incorporated into your biochemistry. It's that the sulfur has stimulated the capillaries to open up even more. So it's a kind of a different way of thinking about it. It's much more of a physical expression
Hmm.
rather than a nutritional expression of the minerals. But we do know that you absorb like waters that have lithium and things like that, and that you do absorb trace amounts of that lithium. But you know, either to my knowledge, and I've looked through this pretty extensively, um, there's no evidence of anyone who's ever overdosed on lithium by soaking in a lithium rich water. So, you know, those are the types of things.
Well, I will share with you in our community here that there's a springs in Mount Shasta called Stewart Mineral Springs
Mm-hmm.
that is one of the unique springs that has really high levels of silica and
Yeah.
also sulfur. And they advise you don't spend more than 10 minutes at a time there because you can get overdosed with that water. It's one of the only springs I've ever seen or experienced, and I've experienced that where when I spent like 20 minutes in, I started getting a rash. And so it's fascinating that you can get potentially too much, but it's pretty rare, I think, to have that happen. But
Yeah, I mean, this is where kind of, you know, the crossover between kind of well-being and wellness practice and medical intervention can occur. So, you know, a classic kind of prescription for a balneotherapy session, you know, a session in a hot springs, usually lasts somewhere between 15 to 20 minutes. It's usually attended by, you know, a spa attendant or, you know, a nurse or something like this. And you usually take one, maybe two of those treatments a day over the course of 2 or 3 weeks, which is kind of that's your kind of spa medicine course. You know, you'll stay at a place for typically, you know, 12 days, and you take, you know, a regimented course of these soaks throughout that time. So instead of, you know, getting a massive kind of reaction to one long soak, you're getting multiple little reactions. So that goes back to that hormesis
mm,
concept. And so it's less that you kind of overdose on the minerals, but it's more that your body is mounting a response to them. And you know, yeah, I think in the United States especially, we tend to think, well, if this is good for me, much more of this will be much better for me. And it is actually much more about the rhythm and the
mm,
kind of, you know, that is really where we get the therapy, is
mm.
that rhythmic effect. It's not like taking a pill where you get this kind of one and done, you know, reaction in the body. It's a process, which is why I love hydrotherapy and balneotherapy. It's actually the process by which we strengthen, regenerate, and kind of restore health in the body. You can actively kind of watch people kind of go through that when they're undertaking a course of treatment, and it's amazing. And it pairs well with any other therapies that you're doing, whether they're conventional pharmacy therapies or, you know, integrative, alternative, what have
Mm.
you.
Yeah. That paced and I'll call it disciplined dosing of water was also shared with us by Lauren Lockman, who we had a few months ago, who has a
Mhm.
water fasting program where he
Yeah,
takes people through water fast for 21 days is the minimum. And the number one thing he said that was critical is to sip your water slowly. It's not to gulp it. It's not about the quantity of water and get it down as fast as you can. It's about to
right.
really take your time and bring it in slowly and let your body integrate it versus drowning your body in water. So,
I think the best analogy I've heard for that one is, you know, if you've ever seen like parched earth, and you douse a bucket of water over it, the water's just going to spill over the earth. Whereas if you drip it drop by drop, it actually absorbs into the earth and re-moisturizes the earth. Or same thing with like a kitchen sponge. You know, if you pour the water over, it just kind of runs over the dry sponge. But if slowly by slowly, you actually rehydrate the sponge.
drip irrigation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we're talking about minerals, we're talking about hot water. There's an enormous trend that is happening in the world, particularly America, for cold water and plunging in ice water. And Wim
Mm,
Hof has made this to be very popular, particularly with our youth, where people are now getting into tubs of ice water and
yeah.
immersing themselves in this. Could you talk with us about that and the healing or maybe even the harmful deleterious aspects of that?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting because I think because it's become such a big popular topic recently. There has been actually a pushback in the media of people saying, well, it's not all so good and it could be a little bit dangerous. And again, this is one of those caveats. It's like, yeah, anything crossing the street can be dangerous if you don't know to look both ways. If you know what to do to do a cold water immersion, it's an amazing therapy. So yeah, before there was Wim Hof, I just always have to give a plug. There was a Bavarian priest from the 1900 or 19th century named Father Sebastian Kneipp. And Father Sebastian Kneipp was the original Wim Hof. He was the first cold water advocate, and he was a priest, and he was looking around his parish, and he was saying, "There's all these sick people, and I want to be able to help them." And he had actually healed himself from tuberculosis after reading a book about cold water river bathing, which was just kind of a folk practice at the time. And so he just started prescribing basic rest, diet, some herbal teas, and cold water hydrotherapy for his parishioners. And he became so popular that the Austro-Hungarian emperor, like built him an institution and kind of really promoted his work. He was the most famous person in the Austro-Hungarian Empire at that time, arguably. So anyway, he always talked about, so I've read a lot of his Father Kneipp's hydrotherapy work eventually came to the United States in the early 1900s with the health culture movement, and actually became what today is naturopathic medicine. That all originated from the Kneipp water therapy school. So just my lineage, I always want to give credit to my lineage, and how I've come by this information. But Kneipp would always talk about cold water therapy. So the benefit of it is that it hardens the system. Okay, this is 19th century lay speak, but nowadays what we know is, and this is what Wim Hof has done a really great job of really promoting, is that there are reproducible biological shifts that occur to the body. Again, this is a hormesis type of thing. Our bodies in an attempt to thermoregulate, to keep our body temperature in a healthy range in the face of a cold water immersion, undergoes all these shifts to do so. And that process is actually where, the real therapeutic benefit of cold water takes its place. And so, first of all, there's, again, going back, there's a thermal component. The cold itself actually constricts down all the capillaries of the skin, and it kind of pushes all this blood that's kind of more at the surface into our deeper, more vital organs. So it creates this kind of circulatory pump and kind of rushes fresh blood through those organs and moves the fluid component of our organs, the lymphatic and the venous blood that can sometimes get a little bit congested in those organs. So it's like we're bringing a fresh kind of supply of oxygen to our more vital tissues. That's the very first thing that happens when you get into a body of cold water or an ice bath. But then what happens is our body starts to react and respond to the healthy stress that we're under, and it does so by trying to like bring more blood back up to the surface. Our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system gets activated as we start to regulate. And when you come out of a cold water, that experience, that resting phase afterwards, is so essential, because that's where our body actually, we spend so much of our lives in this chronic sympathetic fight or flight state. Even a lot of us who probably have some sort of meditation practice or cultivating of mindfulness, just the nature of the culture that we're in, it tends to be this kind of slow burn, but we hold a lot of physical stress in our body. What's interesting about when you do a cold water immersion is that your body goes into a fully activated sympathetic mode. So instead of these kind of little drips of sympathetic kind of, throughout the day, the emails, the phone calls, the traffic, it's like, no, here's what real stress looks like. It's this cold water that I'm in right now. And then when you get out of that, the really beautiful thing is that your body then can kind of come back to a true neutral. And that's what I think, in my estimation, that's one of the most powerful parts of cold water therapy. It doesn't get always talked about enough, is that ability to really kind of bring the parasympathetic and sympathetic balance back to a truly unadapted neutral state. So I think that that's a really beautiful thing. But then the cold temperature itself, again, it kind of upregulates all these metabolic pathways because the body needs to start burning energy faster to keep us warm so that we don't go into hyperthermia is basically what, because our body is intelligent, but it's not, it doesn't always know that we're not going to be in the cold water for forever. So that idea of, and that's where the kind of all these really cool studies that are, a lot of them are coming out of Scandinavia about cold water swimming, like people who are adapted to swimming every day in the cold water, they have a different kind of baseline metabolism than people who don't do that. So that cold kind of like creates these kind of gentle shifts. And when you do it with regularity, not only are you getting this kind of physical, tonic with the bloodstream, like I mentioned, with the nervous system, but you're kind of exercising, for lack of a better term, your kind of mitochondrial health, your metabolic health, and how your body just uses its fuel. So all of those things are happening all at once. And there's a cold plunge, which maybe could last anywhere from 30 to 90 seconds, where you're usually people do that kind of, you've done kind of a hyperthermia sauna, hot spring, hot tub, and then you do a cold plunge, and so you get that kind of that cyclical expansion contraction between the two, which is very beautiful. And that's a lot of what I was using clinically for many years, some form of that therapy. But then you have the more kind of Wim Hof style ice bath, and that's where you're actually immersing in the cold water for a longer period of time, usually more than 3 minutes. A lot of great research kind of seems to think that 8 minutes is a pretty good sweet spot. And what happens at 8 minutes is your body starts to create new capillaries into your muscles. So you get a better return of oxygen. So this is where there's the studies, and they're still mostly animal studies. Some we're starting to move into human studies here, but basically the idea is that if you do regular cold water bathing post exercise, you're going to recover a lot faster because your body is building new roadways to bring oxygen back into the muscles. So removing wastes from the muscles after an intense workout and bringing fresh blood supply to rebuild them happens at a lot faster rate if you do regular cold water bathing. So there's really amazing stuff like that. However, and this is maybe a little controversial, what I'm going to say to you next, in the cold water world, I actually think that one of the most powerful effects that a long cold water exposure has is that it forces us to be present. It's less about the cold water, and it's more about it's a focusing point. It's like any type of kind of meditation practice where there's some sort of extreme thing that is implemented in order to kind of drive the focus. It's how we orient our response to the stress. So it starts to become about the breathing, about our mental kind of focus. And I think that people find that when they're able to kind of engage with their breath, and they're able to kind of find that, for lack of a better term, that Zen spot, they're able to stay a lot longer in those cold waters and practice that kind of resiliency to stress. And that, I think, you can then start practicing that in the world anyway. You don't need cold water for breath and focus, but it shows you what that feels like. So I don't think it's super controversial, but it's one of the things that I think is really quite amazing about longer exposures, is that it really gives you that tool.
Historically, people have talked about there being water wars, and I believe that there's an opportunity for us to have water peace, and for water to unite us, because that is the element which we all have, and that does unite us. And for us to be able to see that, value that, and appreciate that, for us to bring that to each other and to connect us with each other and to bring peace to each of us and all of our communities around the world, because we all know there's a precious time right now for us to create that. And so I'd like to end on that note, with water bringing us all together, opening our hearts, and having us recognize we're all just water beings and we all want the best. So let's have empathy for those that are in, I'll call it pain, and are hurting, because there's the ones who need it the most and need to know that they're cared for and they're loved, and they feel it the least. And that's why we have so much of this strife and violence in the world. And so let's reach out to them and offer our empathy and our support and our love to them with water.